Hi everyone, welcome back to Reference Board. Here we gather inspiration and do reference breakdowns to try and see what we can take from them in terms of ideas and just give our artistic subconscious a little bit of enrichment. So today, rolling the random dice, we're going to take a look at some Assassin's Creed Odyssey references. So let's jump in. Now again, spoilers if you haven't played the game, and most of these are actually taken from later in the game or from expansion type content. Here we have 30 references. I'm going to roll the dice again, and it's given us 28, and that zooms us in here. So I don't know what the right term for this type of ship would be. Obviously, Assassin's Creed Odyssey is set in ancient Greece, but it overlaps into different regions in the general world area as well. But one of the things that makes these games fun is that they overlap historical references with artistic creativity, or liberties, should we say. So when you do have your own ship, there's space for customization. And I do think it's fun that when you're customizing things in video games, to kind of wonder what you would create. If you're an asset developer for the company, what kinds of decorative variations would you design if you had some authority to add new stuff to the game? Exploring games like this is also lovely for environment design. I quite often like to put myself in certain areas, and look out and take a little picture, because as I've said in previous content, having video game worlds with photo modes is always like a bit of a cheating practice for 3D art and composition design, because instead of having to make the space from scratch, you're already provided the sandbox, and all you need to do is just walk around with your digital camera and effectively self-teach yourself composition. As for the ships are things I've seen artwork done for in the 3D space, and especially with Blender a fair few times. And if we're thinking more about historical accuracy, I'm reminded of the work of Martin Kleckner, who's behind the Heroes of Bronze project, which is definitely worth checking out. Here we see an interesting potential challenge or study of how a large-scale texture could be applied to a complex object. A sail, for example, could be a good way of not just having one texture, but also overlaying grungy details on top of it. If you know that the sail is going to flex and change, should you be compressing more detail in a certain direction, like lower, or should you keep it all consistent and just let it flow? And also structurally, if things have to kind of bend down the middle, and if that needs to kind of fold up like a curtain, then is there a potential rig that can be created for that? When thinking about the midpoint of bridging historical accuracy and creative liberties, things like this are good exercises to do some research and see where you want to draw that line. Do you want to keep certain elements like the battering ram, I don't know what that would be called in real life, or decal-like decorations that appeared on ships, or even the actual symbology itself, keep those as the main elements and then fill the rest in with creative intuition? Or do you want to lean fully into realism? So what I'm seeing from this screenshot is inspiration for a variety of exercises. So less direct artistic inspiration and more just, hey, these are a couple of things that I might want to explore in the future. Maybe more so questions, if you will, just to get you thinking and maybe to give you some ideas for things you can do as learning exercises. Here's another one for you then. The figurehead of a ship is largely meant to symbolize the ship or the crew itself, or in many ways it can maybe be like a projection of intent or personality, I suppose. If you were to design your own ship, what would your figurehead look like? What shape would it be? What would that represent? Would it be an animal? Would it be something much more symbolic or abstract? So maybe that's just something fun to think about. Now we're going to move on to number 7. So number 7 is more artistically interesting. This is again from some of the expansion environments of Odyssey. Here we have a balance of colossal scales. So obviously in the background we've got this massive waterfall-like structure going around with cliff-like elements. And then we have these rolling fields. On cliffy areas, we've got what's maybe a combination of pillars and stalactites. And then in the foreground, we have something much more futuristic, but still kind of ancient in a way. It calls back to the marbly materials, which are typically present on a lot of the statues and the marbles present in ancient Greek areas, temple-like structure back there. And then pink trees, which actually remind me more of like a Japanesey type thing. So again, obviously creative liberties here. This is not a realistic place. But the thing I find interesting about that is it's not supposed to be. It's almost like a dreamlike representation of what an ancient culture projected into the future would be like, but abstracted through the veil of a futuristic element. So when we zoom in, we get something that's more reminiscent of Greek landscape, hills, temples, maybe some agriculture, maybe some rivers cutting through. So it keeps the essence while also providing something that allows more connectivity to extra genres. So that itself becomes an interesting exercise. So this is perhaps another idea for a challenge you might want to set yourself. Choose a culture from ancient Earth, but maybe even one of your own if you want to, but it would be interesting to do one from a realistic culture, maybe Mayan or Aztec, thinking South America, because I'm not sure how much that's been done. I mean, I suppose the new Black Panther film tried to do that, right? Like, what would a futuristic Mayan environment look like? But I feel like some of you out there could probably do a better job. If you had to abstract an ancient culture or a classical culture into a more futuristic dreamscape, what elements of the culture and environment do you bring forward to do that? And how is that represented? Because I feel like this is quite a beautiful one of ancient Greek culture abstracted. So I might like to suggest that to you as a potential exercise. Now, obviously, there's more references here we can take a look at for that. Many more, but maybe we'll come back to that. Let's see one more. So we'll generate again. 27. So that's actually bringing us here, which is quite a different one. So now we're breaching into much more sci-fi territory, still part of the same expansion, by the way. I don't want to give too much away in the story, but there's a point where you get to this special underground area, should we say, that gives you access to a bunch of new environments, these abstracted types we've been taking a look at. But this environment is the crossroads between ancient human history and advanced technology from a precursor species. And that's always fascinating. That combination of things has stuck around in our collective human conscious for a while, and we see it kind of manifest in a lot of conspiracy theories, obviously. It's all over the place. It's in popular media, and it also kind of ties into our obsession of the idea of aliens and extraterrestrial life and something running parallel to human history. In this case, it's interesting because, again, it's much more leaning into the futuristic element rather than the cultural ancient element that we mentioned a bit earlier. So this thing here is much more from like a science fiction type environment, and maybe you'll take inspiration from the user interface elements here. But this is effectively a bridge area between the regular classical ancient world and the abstracted, almost dreamscape-like environments. It's interesting thinking about the ones we've looked at so far. If you think about them on a spectrum, it's like we've gone full classic, on the other side, full futuristic, stylized, and then somewhere in the middle, we have this one. So it's interesting to consider them on a spectrum like that. If I was to take anything away from this one, I would actually be looking over here. You see how we've got like these triangular-like structures. Assuming they were made of similar material to what's seen elsewhere through the game, like the same kinds of construction materials that the ancient Greeks used, that raises an interesting question. What if you use the same materials and styles, but in a different pattern? In this case, something more futuristic. What kind of interesting varieties would that provide? So hopefully that's given you a few fun things to think about. But that's where we'll leave it. If you made it this far through the video, then feel free to support my work by signing up at patreon.com/CurtisHolt, and you will get access to these reference files. If you want to download them after you're signed into the Patreon, go to curtisholt.online/members, and they'll basically give you links to where you can access the things, because it's not always easy to find things on Patreon. Otherwise, you can check out my main channel at youtube.com/CurtisHolt, and I make artistic resources and tools for Blender to help 3D artists. So if you did make it this far, put some kind of classical related emoji in the comments. If you press the Windows key and the period key, if you're on Windows, it will open an emoji keyboard. People are often quite surprised to learn about that. And I believe, if I try that, here it is. Let's type in classic. If you type in classic in the keyboard, it should give you the classical building emoji. So if you put that in the comments, I'll see if you made it this far. Otherwise, have a fantastic day, everyone, and I'll see you next time.